right, well, this is a cautionary tale to just give you fair warning of how very little the muse needs to work with. Some years ago, after a Wednesday night fighter practice, Sir Silverthorn sent out a note to the populace of Clefland saying, "Has anybody seen my blue fighting tunic? I had it at practice, but I can't find it now." And the muse said, "Hold my beer." Sir Silverthorn had a blue tunic that under his armor he wore. It bore all the brunt of his fighting, and many blows suffered full sore. For many years he had worn it, and it never had needed a wash. When it got stiff and fragrant, he just beat it until it was soft. It was Silverthorn's blue fighting tunic that we recall to mind. Sir Silverthorn's blue fighting tunic, the one that was left behind. It was after a practice one Wednesday when the great knight unpacked his bag. He had packed up his kit in a hurry, in haste to saddle his nag. His blue fighting tunic was missing. He searched, but it could not be found. Sir Silverthorn was not forgetful. He'd never lost hawk nor hound. The tunic was rolled in a bundle back at the practice hall, the place where the populace gathered each week to answer the call. It lay all alone in the darkness, abandoned behind a chair, when a silvery shaft of moonlight illuminated it there. The tunic glowed in the moonlight. It seemed to shimmer and shift. And then, in the silence, it quivered. And then it began to lift. The tunic arose in the moonlight, and there it slowly unrolled. It turned to its left, and then to its right, and then it went out for a stroll. What magic was moonlight making that thus animated a shirt? It was only an old fighting tunic encrusted with sweat and with dirt. But for years the great knight had worn it, and so at length, it had become saturated with power, with pungent prowess and strength. It was Silverthorn's blue fighting tunic, nearly his own flesh and bone. Silverthorn's blue fighting tunic acquired a life of its own. It sailed through the streets of the city and flapped like a proud battle flag. It was seeing these sights for the first time. It was usually stuffed in a bag. It came to the banks of a river that twists and turns. A great river for a great city. A river that occasionally burns. The tunic stood in confusion amidst all the ships and the cranes, for the tunic had never seen water, except as occasionally rain. The tunic stood there and wondered what would happen if it went for a swim. But the tunic was ripe for adventure, and so the tunic dove in. Now, you might think our story would end there, that the magic would all wash away and the tunic would float down the river and I'd had naught else to say. But this is the Crooked River, a river of fire and ice, and there are things in the Crooked River, things not noble, not nice. The dark current savaged the tunic. Its goodness was utterly spent. The tunic, now twisted and evil, on mayhem and pillage was bent. It boarded a merchant vessel by climbing the anchor chain. It flung itself at a crewman who called out in terror and pain. He cried out for aid to his shipmates. They rushed to his side, but then this was Silverthorn's tunic, and it had the strength of 10 men. One crusty old salt saw the carnage. He knew how to settle the score, for he had once been a fighter. Why, he'd served on the Carrig Moor, that great floating shire of legend that sailed the 7 seas, with nuclear-tipped rattan weapons and pennons in the flight deck's breeze. He ran below decks to the laundry, and you know what happened next. 1 cupful of soap, and that tunic collapsed in a heap on the deck. And so ends the tale of the tunic that briefly knew its own mind. Sir Silverthorn's blue fighting tunic, the one that was left behind.